Hello everyone, welcome to tonight's presentation on Decoding Food Labels by Brooke Hudson, Registered Dietitian. We're excited to have you join us. This session is brought to you on behalf of Community Health Network's Survivorship Program. If you would like more information on future programming, please call the Survivorship team at 317-621-4961, or you can go online to ecommunity.com/survivorship. This program is being recorded and all participants will be muted during the presentation. We will unmute you at the end for any additional questions that we can answer following the presentation. We would appreciate any feedback for future programming and ideas, so a survey will be emailed to you within a few days. Thank you guys for being here. All right, we'll get started with decoding food labels. So the objectives of this presentation are to understand the importance of food labels, understand the different nutrients on food labels and what these do in the body, and recognize and understand common marketing claims on food labels. So the overview of a food label. If you've been in a grocery store at any point, which I'm sure you guys have, food labels are everywhere. They're on most products and they have many different components, and the label varies based on the food product. Understanding how to read them is important. It helps clarify the nutrition composition of your food and helps you to understand how this fits into your daily goals and nutrient needs. It also helps to make educated, stress-free choices at the grocery store, aids in avoiding products containing common allergens, and helps to prevent confusion from common marketing claims. So with all this in mind, the presentation will cover a variety of different things about food labels and how to better understand what you're seeing in the store. So just for an example of a nutrition facts label, I picked Cheerios as a product that you guys have probably seen in the store previously. So here's a couple pieces of the food label, the front of what a box of Cheerios usually looks like. You'll usually be able to find the food label on the side of these products. And here's just the general overview of the food label, and we'll break it down into parts and go through what each part means and how to decode each part of the food label. To start off, the top of the food label typically contains serving size. It's usually the first thing you'll see when reading through the nutrition facts label. Understanding serving size is important in making information on the rest of the label clear. Here you can see the measurement classified as a serving, as well as how many total calories are in the container. Typically with serving size, they decide to pick a measurement that is commonly known. So in the case of Cheerios, 1.5 cups is something that you would typically be able to measure in your kitchen. So they use that as a baseline for what a serving looks like. It's important to remember that serving size is not a portion size estimate, but it is a portion size estimate, but does not mean that you should not eat more or less of the product. This all depends on your personal needs. So they just put it on there as what an average serving might look like of a specific food, but of course, what you eat depends on your own personal needs. Using this number of serving size, you can calculate the actual nutrition value of a meal or snack. So example, for this serving, 1.5 cups of Cheerios is 140 calories. It's important to remember that if you're consuming more than that, you can calculate what the total caloric picture of that is by using multiplication. So if you consume 2 cups, you'd be getting 210 calories. It's important that if you do increase the serving size, you increase this for the rest of the nutrients on the label as well. So if you multiplied this by 2, you multiply the carbs, protein, fat, and everything else on the label by the same amount to get the total nutrition picture of the specific food. The next part on the label is typically calories. This can be defined as the total amount of energy in a serving. So with calories, the general recommendation that they follow on food labels is 2,000 calories per day. However, it's important to remember that calorie needs are highly individualized and can depend on several factors, including age, activity level, height, weight. While you might not necessarily have access to a registered dietitian to calculate your needs, there are ways to calculate and estimate your needs at home. There's apps, websites, etc. Just to get a picture of maybe what your nutrition needs look like if you're interested in that. In this example, one serving of Cheerios provides 140 calories, while two would provide 280 calories. Following the calorie component of the food label, there are lots of other nutrients that are listed, and we'll go through those in a bit more detail now. This is usually the biggest portion of the food label, so there's a lot to unpack here. Food labels contain information on the amount of many macronutrients and micronutrients contained within the product. Based on your needs, this portion of the label can be helpful in making choices that contain adequate amounts of the nutrients that you need or are more focused on. It's important to take note of specific nutrients on the label that it is recommended to limit. This includes added sugars, sodium, and saturated fat. Additionally, there are nutrients that are important to get adequate amounts of, such as fiber, calcium, iron, potassium, and vitamin D. To go into a little bit about why it's important to get more of these nutrients, nutrients such as fiber are important to regulate your digestive system and can also play a role in regulating blood sugar levels. Calcium helps to build and maintain strong bones. Iron is important for oxygen transport and energy production. And potassium is important for maintaining fluid balance and also regulating your blood sugar, as well as vitamin D is important for bone health and immune function. So those are nutrients that if you look at, sometimes higher amounts are more beneficial versus the ones listed in the first section are ones that we would like to see lower amounts of on a food label. Next is the macronutrient component. So when you hear people talk about counting macros or counting macronutrients, this is the section of the label that they're referring to. These are the nutrients that contribute to the total calories in a food, or the calorie-containing nutrients. So each of these have their own caloric value, and we'll go through that here. Carbohydrates are the first macronutrient. They are the primary fuel source of the body. So for carbohydrates, 1 gram of carbs equals 4 calories. So when you're looking at the total calories, this is how that would be calculated. Protein, along with many other functions, helps to build and repair body tissues. 1 gram of protein is also 4 calories. And then the last macronutrient is fat. This is an additional energy source that also helps with fat-soluble vitamin absorption. Fat would be the highest caloric value, so 1 gram of fat is 9 calories. Along with the macronutrient section, there's also a micronutrient section, which is usually found in the bottom portion of the label. This includes the vitamins, so the fat-soluble vitamins, which would be vitamin A, D, E, and K, as well as the water-soluble vitamins, which are your C vitamin and your B vitamins. Minerals are also included here, such as calcium, potassium, magnesium, sodium, iron, etc. There's a lot of different ones that you could find here depending on the food, so it's important to look at this section if you do have specific micronutrient goals that you're working towards. The goal with all of these is to get a balanced diet, which means getting a variety of vitamins and minerals. A lot of times when we talk about a balanced diet, we talk about making a balanced plate in terms of including a lot of different colors. So if you're including a lot of colors in your plate, it's good to assume that you're probably getting a lot of different vitamins and minerals. Another portion on the label is sugar, and it's important to look at this portion because there is a distinction between sugar and added sugar. So you'll usually find these next to each other under carbs because sugar is a carb. So total sugars includes both those that naturally occur in food and those that are added during processing. So for example, a food with naturally occurring sugars would be fruit. Added sugars are those that are added during processing. It is recommended to limit added sugars as diets that have excess of these have been linked to the development of conditions such as type 2 diabetes, obesity, and heart disease. So this is an interesting portion of the food label to look into whenever you're looking through a specific food. Another key part of the food label is the percent daily value. This can be found in the right column, usually underneath the total amount of calories. This is important because it's the percentage of a specific nutrient that one serving of a product provides based on the daily recommended intake. It's important to note this number will change depending on how many servings are consumed. So just like with the other nutrients, if you do consume an additional serving, you will need to multiply that in order to get what the total percent value of a specific nutrient you're getting in the amount of the food that you're eating. These percentages are typically based off of a general recommendation of 2,000 calories. So as we talked about before, depending on your specific needs, this percentage may be more or less based on what you need. However, it is a good baseline to look into just to see how much of a specific food or specific nutrient that you're getting with a specific food. The last portion that we typically see on a food label is the ingredients list. These, of course, can be really long, so they can be a bit confusing to look into. This does include all of the ingredients that are contained within a product. It's important to note that the ingredients are listed in order of how much is included in the product. So those that are listed first will be most prominent in the food versus those at the end are the ones that are the least of the components of the food. Allergen information can also usually be found near the ingredient list on a food label. Food labels are required to disclose allergens contained in products, and the top 9 that you will usually find on food labels include milk, eggs, tree nuts, peanuts, fish, shellfish, wheat, soy, and sesame. This can be really important if you're cooking for someone that has an allergy or you yourself have a food allergy, and they are required to have those on there, so that's an important section to look into. Another portion of the food label is additives. You can find additives within the ingredient list, so it's useful to be able to pick these out and see when they might be contained in a specific food. Ingredient lists may contain items that are referred to as additives, and these can be used for a variety of reasons. Improving texture is one of those, flavor, and increasing product shelf life. These can also be referred to as preservatives. Examples of these include artificial colors and dyes, artificial sweeteners, carrageenan, and high fructose corn syrup. So with additives, they're not all necessarily classified as harmful. However, since they do alter the structure and function of a food, it is important to limit these if possible. The list could go on with these as well. This is just a brief list of some of those you might see. There are also some food label variations that have become more prominent in recent years, so I wanted to mention a couple of those here just so you have an idea of what those might look like. One of these is dual column food labels. These typically include the amount per serving on one side, and then on the other side, they include the amount of nutrition per container. So these can be helpful if it's maybe a smaller product that you might eat the whole container of versus doing a small serving. But it's important to note the rest of the label is the same in terms of what's contained. It just has 2 different variables to look at when looking at the nutrition value. An additional label variation is a single ingredient label. So for this example, I used honey. Looking at honey, it's the only ingredient that will be contained is honey in this case. So it just covers specifically what's in that product. So it typically wouldn't contain an ingredient list. And it also would just do a brief overview of what you're getting from that. So this is one that you might see on foods such as honey, maple syrup, things like that. Now to get into the marketing claims that you might see on specific food products. I know this is an area that can get a little bit confusing just because there's so many different claims out there and it's hard to know exactly what each of those mean. So there are some claims that use percent daily value to make claims. So in this case, a less than 5% daily value is considered a low amount of a nutrient, and greater than 20% of daily value is considered a high amount of a nutrient. So while these can be confusing because it's not always clear on what the standards are for each claim, there are some examples on the next slide that we can go through that will give a little bit more idea about the rationale for those claims. To continue the marketing claims, some examples of common claims and standards. One of these is fat-free or sugar-free. So For a product to be classified in either of these, it has to contain less than half a gram of either. Low sodium is another one that we see a lot. For a low sodium product, it must contain less than 140 milligrams of sodium. Reduced, so if you see a label that says reduced fat, this would mean it has less than 25% of the nutrient or calories of the normal item. Good source of is another one that is commonly seen. In this case, it must contain at least 10% of the daily recommendation of the specific nutrient. Enriched versus fortified is another area that can get a little bit confusing. Enriched products are products that have nutrients that have been restored in a product that may have been lost during processing. So in this case, sometimes you'll see like enriched flour that has nutrients added back in that were lost during processing. And then fortified is another example. In fortified products, additional nutrients have been added that were not originally found in the regular food. So a specific example of this is orange juice that has calcium and vitamin D added. This would be a fortified product. So when you see those two, it's important to distinguish what each of them means. Some additional terms to review that you might see on food labels that are of specific interest right now. Organic is one of those that you might see. For organic products, they have to meet specific standards for this classification. So this can include a lot of different things, but specifically no use of synthetic pesticides, fertilizers, and antibiotics. Organic foods are also made without the use of genetically modified organisms or GMOs. I included a label at the top. You might see that or a variation of that on classified organic foods. Some additional terms that you might see: grass-fed. This is specific to what an animal had while being raised. So you could see that on, meat products and items like that. Cage-free would be another classification. This relates to the living conditions of an animal while being raised. So it's important to look for these, and it's important to understand what each of these means, just so you get a better idea of what kind of product that you're getting. So in summary of all of these tips, it's important to use serving size to educate yourself on the total nutrition picture of a product. Using from the serving size down, you can multiply out what each of these products contains and help better understand and evaluate nutrition facts labels with your own goals in mind. This can create a more stress-free experience at the grocery store and just help you to better understand what you're getting in the meals that you make or the foods that you buy from the store. It's important to pay attention to percent daily value when determining if a food is a good source of a specific nutrient, and using the marketing tips from above to determine if they don't have a specific classification, if a percentage is less than 5 or higher than 20, whether it's a good or not a great source of a specific nutrient. And then lastly, understanding common marketing terms is important, and using these to evaluate what you know about food labels can be helpful in debunking the myths that you might see in marketing terms without much factual basis.